The autumn of 1944 over Nazi-occupied Europe was a sky of perpetual thunder. The roar of Allied bomber streams, thousands of B-17 flying fortresses and B-24 Liberators, was a sound that shook the very continent, a mechanical heartbeat of impending doom for the Third Reich. German radar operators, hunched over their flickering Würzburg and Mehmet screens in concrete bunkers from the coast of France to the heart of the Ruhr, had become accustomed to a specific, terrifying signature. Dense, clustering blips that coalesced into vast, slow-moving clouds of hostile aircraft. Their job was to count, to plot vectors, to feed data to the flak batteries and the dwindling squadrons of the Luftwaffe. But on a crisp, clear morning in late October, something different painted itself across the cathode ray tube of a Freya early warning station on the Dutch coast. The operator, a veteran who had tracked everything from Spitfires to V-1 flying bombs, adjusted his headset and leaned in, his brow furrowed. At the extreme edge of his range, a single contact burned with an unusual intensity. It was not part of a stream, it was solitary. And it was moving not with the ponderous, stately pace of a bomber formation, but with a speed that rivaled the fastest fighter interceptors. The shape of the return was what truly arrested him. The Freya radar, while primitive by later standards, could give a rough indication of size, and, to a trained eye, even silhouette. This was no blunt, squared-off return of a heavy bomber. It was elongated, slender, and, most peculiarly, the wings did not present as distinct, angular protrusions. The signal suggested a smooth, continuous curve, like a crescent moon or a bird's wing in a full, graceful sweep. It was a shape that whispered of speed and purpose, utterly alien in a sky dominated by the right-angled, rivet-studded workhorses of war. He called his superior over, pointing a nicotine-stained finger at the ghostly green trace. Her lieutenant, contact, bearing 285, altitude, very high, speed exceeding 700 kilometers, single aircraft. Its form, I do not recognize the form. The lieutenant, peering at the screen, dismissed it initially. Atmospheric anomaly, or British jamming. They are getting clever with their window. He referred to the clouds of aluminum chaff dropped by Allied bombers to confuse radar. But this blip held its course and its strange predatory shape with a consistency that chaff did not possess. A second radar site, further inland, picked up the same track minutes later, confirming the contact. Reports were telephoned up the chain, first to the regional Jagd division, then to the headquarters of the Luftwaffe's formidable air defense network. In a command center deep beneath Berlin, maps were marked, teletypes chattered. Senior officers, already strained by the relentless round-the-clock Allied offensive, examined the plotted course. The aircraft was heading on a direct line for the industrial heartland of the Reich, but its profile matched nothing in the extensive identification books, tomes filled with silhouettes of every known Allied aircraft, from the sturdy P-47 Thunderbolt to the sleek Mosquito. This was something else. Something that flew higher and faster than a Mosquito, yet presented a radar signature that was both smaller and more defined than a heavy bomber. A debate erupted among the grim-faced men. Had British scientists made a sudden, miraculous leap in progress? Was this a captured German design, somehow reverse-engineered? Or was the relentless pressure, the sleepless nights, finally causing their sophisticated equipment and their minds to play tricks? The equipment must be malfunctioning, a General Mayor stated, his voice seeking to impose order on the unknown. The stresses of constant operation, it is the only explanation. But in their hearts, a colder, more unsettling doubt began to form. The radar wasn't lying. It was showing them a future they were not prepared to face. The order was issued from the underground labyrinth: intercept and identify. At a forward airfield near Dortmund, the scramble klaxon shattered the morning calm. Lieutenant Erich Hartmann, not the famed ace but a capable young pilot with a handful of kills to his name, sprinted through the gray dawn towards his waiting Messerschmitt Bf-109G. His briefing had been unnervingly vague. High-altitude intruder, unusual radar signature, possible reconnaissance aircraft. The mission felt different. There was no talk of bomber streams, no specific formation to break up, just a single, mysterious target. Hartmann's Gustav climbed swiftly, its Daimler-Benz engine snarling as he pierced the cloud layer, emerging into a world of brilliant, unforgiving sunlight. Ground control vectored him north, his eyes scanning the empty deep blue vault. At 28,000 feet, he was told the target was above him, much higher. He pushed the throttle forward, the engine laboring in the thin air. His oxygen mask hissed steadily. At 35,000 feet, near the operational ceiling of his 109, he saw it. At first, it was just a dark speck, a mote against the azure. But as he closed the distance, the speck resolved into a shape that made his breath catch, the condensation from his exhale momentarily fogging his goggles. He blinked, wiped the glass, and looked again. It was beautiful, and its beauty was terrifying. It hung in the sky with an almost serene poise, a creature utterly at home in a realm where his own machine felt strained and fragile. It had no propellers. That was the first brain-stuttering detail. No spinning discs, no blur of motion at the front. It was all sleek, uninterrupted form. The wings were not straight like the ones of his 109 or the Allied bombers. They swept back in a dramatic, elegant curve, like the wings of a swift or a falcon, in a way that made it hard to tell where the wing ended and the body began. The entire aircraft seemed carved from a single, polished piece of dark metal, reflecting the sun in a hard liquid gleam. There were no rivet lines, no panel joints, no gun turrets. It was as smooth as a bullet. And it was silent. The only sound was the roar of his own engine and the rush of wind over his canopy. The strange aircraft cut through the rarefied air with a ghostly predatory quiet, leaving only the faintest whisper of a contrail. It moved with a purposefulness that felt unhuman, a machine of pure function, stripped of the crude, bolted-together pragmatism of every other aircraft in the war. Hartmann banked, trying to get a better angle, to see some marking, some insignia. There were none. It was a slate-gray phantom. He fumbled for his radio trigger, his mouth dry inside the mask. "Control, this is Adler 7. I have visual contact." He paused, his training fighting with the sheer cognitive shock of what he was seeing. The words that came out were not a technical description of size, armament, or markings. They were the raw, unfiltered impression of a man confronting something beyond his understanding. His voice, crackling with static, carried a tone of awe and dread back to the listening ears in the bunker. "It doesn't look human. It looks like the future." For a few more seconds, he shadowed it, but the altitude differential was too great. His 109 began to buffet, losing lift. The unknown aircraft, without any apparent effort, simply continued its eastward drift, pulling slowly, inexorably away from him, shrinking back into a speck and then into nothingness against the immensity of the sky. Hartmann descended, his mind racing. The image of that silent, curved shape burned into his memory. He had not been in a battle. He had been in the presence of an apparition. The report from Lieutenant Hartmann combined with the radar data sent a seismic shock through the upper echelons of the Luftwaffe and the Reich's scientific establishment. In the offices of the Reich Luftwaffe Ministerium, the Reich Aviation Ministry, and the design bureaus of Messerschmitt and Focke-Wulf, a frantic analysis began. The conclusion they reached was the only one their paradigm allowed. The Allies had achieved a technological breakthrough of staggering proportions. They had leapt not years, but perhaps a full decade ahead. German engineers, proud of their own advanced projects like the Messerschmitt Me-262 jet fighter and the rocket-powered Me-163 Comet, now faced the galling possibility that their enemies had rendered even these wonders obsolete before they had fully entered service. They assumed the aircraft was a high-altitude strategic bomber or reconnaissance platform, constructed with secrets of metallurgy and propulsion that Germany had not yet unlocked. Theories flew. It was powered by a revolutionary turbojet, or perhaps even a crude ramjet. Its smooth skin suggested advanced construction techniques, possibly even radar-defeating properties. The crescent wing, they correctly surmised, was for high-speed, high-altitude efficiency, delaying the onset of compressibility drag, a problem German engineers were. The solitary aircraft did not deviate from its path. It held its course over the Ruhr Valley, a dark, graceful silhouette, sliding with chilling indifference above the industrial heart of the Reich. Below, the sprawling complexes of Krupp in Essen, the synthetic fuel plants at Gelsenkirchen, and the rail yards of Dortmund lay exposed under the autumn sun. Flak batteries, their crews having been warned of a high-speed intruder, spun their barrels skyward. But by the time their optical spotters caught a glimpse, a fleeting silver-gray scratch against the blue, and the 88mm guns began to cough their black puffs of defiance, the target was already miles beyond the bursting shells, the explosions lagging pathetically in its wake like a distant, impotent thunder. It didn't attack. There was no sudden, whistling descent of ordnance, no opening of bomb bays to disgorge destruction. It didn't even slow down. Its mission was one of pure observation, a cold, clinical examination conducted from a sanctuary of speed and altitude. Within its smooth fuselage, in a pressurized compartment where the air was thin and electric with purpose, cameras of a new generation whirred silently. They were not the oblique angle reconnaissance cameras of Mosquitoes or Spitfires. These were massive, vertically mounted units, with lenses ground to a perfection that captured staggering detail from heights previously considered useless for tactical intelligence. They clicked and advanced their film with a steady metronomic rhythm, capturing not just the outlines of factories, but the patterns of rail traffic, the dispersal of aircraft on Luftwaffe fields, the very texture of German industry. As it passed over the most heavily defended airspace on the planet, the aircraft was also listening. A bank of sensitive receivers, tuned across the spectrum of German radar frequencies, soaked in the electronic landscape. Each Würzburg gun-laying radar, each Freya early warning array, each experimental mammoth sent out its probing fingers of radio energy. To the flying wing, these were not threats, but subjects of study. The receivers logged their frequency, pulse repetition rate, signal strength, and bearing. This data, recorded onto oscillograph film and wax cylinder recorders, was the true treasure. It would allow Allied electronic warfare experts to refine jamming techniques, to understand the evolving capabilities of German air defense, and to map the blind spots in their coverage. Then, its silent survey complete, the aircraft banked in a long, gentle turn to the west. It did not flee. It simply concluded its business. It accelerated, the curved wings biting into the thin air, its contra-rotating propellers becoming a faint, shimmering haze. It slipped into a high cloud layer, a bank of cumulus, and was swallowed whole. One moment it was a tangible, if distant, reality. The next it was gone, leaving only a dissipating contrail and a profound, echoing silence. On the ground, in the radar bunkers and command centers, a different kind of silence descended. It was the silence of bafflement, of a threat that had come and gone without revealing its intent. The analysts, men trained to interpret bomb patterns, raid sizes, and fighter escort tactics, were left with nothing but a set of impossible parameters and a terrifying open-ended question. What was the purpose of such a machine, if not to destroy? And if this is what they dared to fly alone and unmolested over the heart of Germany, what else could the Allies be hiding? The unknown is always more frightening than the known threat. The flying wing had not dropped a single bomb, but it had planted a seed of deep, strategic dread that would fester in the minds of the German high command. The reports, stripped from the awestruck tone of pilots like Hartmann and condensed into cold military telex, piled up on the desks of the Luftwaffe General Staff in the bomb-proofed corridors of the Bendler Block in Berlin. They formed a dossier of the inexplicable. From Luftgau Kommando West, radar contact designated Geist, ghost. Radar cross-section minimal, inconsistent with size suggested by visual. Echo fluctuates, difficult to hold lock. Similar to large fighter, not bomber. From Jutted Fliegerführer Mittel. Visual intercept attempted by Bf-109G of III.JG-26. Pilot reports aircraft at approximately 40,000 feet. No propellers, no visible propulsion, crescent-shaped wing. Estimated speed in excess of 750 kilometers an hour in level flight. No defensive armament observed. Aircraft unresponsive to visual signals. From Signals Intelligence Regiment 3. No radio traffic detected from Geist on any standard Allied tactical or command frequency during overflight. Complete radio silence maintained. From Flak Regiment 122. Optical sighting only. Target altitude beyond effective engagement ceiling of 88 mm Flak 3637. Speed rendered predictive fire solutions impossible. Each line was a piece of a puzzle that refused to cohere. The data contradicted established doctrine. A machine that large, capable of such altitude and speed, should have presented a massive radar return. It did not. It should have been powered by a revolutionary engine, a jet or rocket, yet no pilot reported exhaust plumes or the distinctive shriek of a turbine. Only the strange, whispering hum of those hidden propellers. It maintained a communications blackout so absolute, it seemed robotic. In the map rooms where the war was managed, theories erupted, each more unsettling than the last. The pragmatic aviation technocrats, men like General Lieutenant Adolf Galland, head of the fighter force, leaned toward the long-range reconnaissance jet theory. It is a high-altitude spy plane. Its purpose is to see, not to fight. It is the logical evolution of the mosquito, stripped of everything but speed and cameras. This was a terrifying enough prospect, an invulnerable eye. But others, in the paranoid, chemical-fueled atmosphere of Hitler's inner circle, voiced a chilling alternative in a secret conference. Could it be a delivery system? A platform for a single, special weapon? The word Sonderwaffe, special weapon, hung in the air. If the Allies were ahead in the atomic race, as some feared, this silent, unstoppable aircraft would be the perfect courier of apocalypse. The most psychologically attuned officers, those steeped in the Nazi obsession with will and perception, proposed an even more insidious idea. It is a Psychowaffe, a weapon of the mind, suggested a Gestapo liaison to the Luftwaffe. Its very appearance, its defiance of our laws of physics, is meant to demoralize our technicians, to sow doubt in our leadership, to make our soldiers believe the enemy possesses magical technology. It is a bluff made of aluminum and speed. In a regime built on the myth of Aryan technological superiority, the idea that the Allies could produce something so aesthetically and functionally sublime was a blow to the foundational ideology. The cacophony of theories reached the wolf's lair. Hitler, increasingly detached from reality and prone to fury at any suggestion of enemy superiority, demanded answers. He screamed at Luftwaffe Chief Gutting, who turned to batter his subordinates. "I want this aircraft captured. I want it understood. Is it American, British, a ghost? Find out." But no answers came. No wreckage fell into their hands. No spy provided a blueprint. No amount of screaming could change the data on the reports. The Geist came, been seen, and departed, leaving only a vacuum of understanding and a hierarchy vibrating with panic and impotent rage. The machine had achieved a profound victory without firing a single shot. It had fractured the enemy's certainty. The truth emerged not in a blaze of glory, but in the slow, dry rustle of declassified paper in the archives of the victorious powers. In the late 1950s and 60s, as the Cold War demanded new secrets, some of the old ones were allowed to surface. Historians and aviation enthusiasts, sifting through newly accessible files at the National Archives in Washington and the Imperial War Museum in London, began to piece together the full, astonishing story. The aircraft that had so haunted the Nazis was identified, the Northrop UB-49, a jet-powered evolution of the earlier propeller-driven XB-35 flying wing. The specific mission that autumn day in 1944 was likely flown by one of the handful of N9M or XB-35 prototypes, possibly on a long-range endurance test or a clandestine ferry flight to a European theater for special evaluation. The archives confirmed the deepest German fears about its purpose while completely inverting their understanding of its context. Yes, it was a prototype, tested only a handful of times. The program was fraught with challenges, control instability, engine fires, structural quirks. It was, in many ways, a fragile experiment. Yes, it carried no bombs on that flight. Its bomb bays, had they been installed, were empty. Its real mission was twofold, and both objectives were chillingly successful. The primary technical objective was indeed to measure Luftwaffe radar performance. The flight was an early, breathtakingly bold example of what would become known as ferret missions in the Cold War. By provoking and recording the German defensive electronic response, the Allies built an invaluable library of enemy capabilities. Every radar pulse that touched its sleek skin was a piece of data used to win the invisible war of the electromagnetic spectrum. The secondary objective was grander, more psychological, and perhaps not even fully articulated by its planners: to show what the future of aviation would look like. Jack Northrop wasn't just building a bomber, he was preaching a gospel of aerodynamic purity. Sending such a machine, even inadvertently over enemy territory, was the ultimate demonstration of that gospel's power. It was a statement written in aluminum and laminar flow. This is the direction of travel. This is the shape of things to come. It worked. Beyond any measurable intelligence gain, the psychological operation was a total, resounding success. The Nazis, with their own advanced but conceptually conventional jet and rocket programs, looked at the flying wing and saw not a flawed prototype, but a completed weapon from another century. They interpreted its radical elegance as a sign of a mature, deployed technology. They filled the gaps in their knowledge with their own fears, imagining it as a nuclear chariot or a weapon of psychic terror. The ultimate irony revealed in the full light of history was that the aircraft they feared would define the next decades of warfare was in fact a dead end for a time. The flying wing's stability problems proved too great for 1940s technology. The program was canceled in the early 1950s, a tragedy for Jack Northrop. The future, it seemed, belonged to the conventional swept-wing jets like the B-52. But the seed had been planted. The image of that silent, crescent-shaped ghost over the Ruhr never truly faded. It lingered in the minds of aircraft designers, a promise of efficiency and stealth. Decades later, when computer fly-by-wire systems could tame the flying wing's instability and the need to evade radar became paramount, the concept was reborn. In the 1980s, the Northrop Grumman B-2 Spirit, a sleek black subsonic flying wing, rolled out of its hangar. It was the direct, triumphant descendant of the UB-49. The machine the Nazis thought came from the future finally had arrived, fulfilling the prophecy written in the skies over a dying Reich. The phantom had become real, and the future, at last, had caught up with the vision. The paradox of the flying wing was as profound as its silhouette. It was a concept so visionary it unlocked aerodynamic secrets of the next age, yet it was shackled to the technological limitations of its own. In the sun-bleached California desert at Muroc Army Airfield, later Edwards Air Force Base, where the future of American aviation was being forged in a crucible of risk and flame, the UB-49 prototypes revealed a heartbreaking truth. Genius had outpaced the machinery required to tame it. The problems were not mere teething pains, they were fundamental challenges that struck at the very core of the design's revolutionary nature. The first and most terrifying was control instability. A conventional aircraft, with its long fuselage and distinct tail, is inherently stable, like a dart. The flying wing, a sleek disc, was not. It was neutrally stable, and in certain flight regimes it could become actively unstable. It lacked the long lever arm of a tail to provide strong corrective yaw and pitch authority. Pilots, the finest testmen of their generation, described it as flying on a knife's edge. A slight control input could lead to an overcorrection, which then required another, creating a deadly, escalating oscillation known as a divergent yaw. In one harrowing incident, the UB-49 entered such a role during a low-speed test. Only the superhuman effort of the pilot, wrestling with a control column that seemed to fight him with a mind of its own, prevented a catastrophic spin. The aircraft demanded constant, minute, exhausting adjustments. It was, as one engineer lamented, a machine that thinks for itself, and its thoughts are chaotic. Then came the engines. The original XB-35's four massive 3,000-horsepower Pratt & Whitney Wasp major radial engines, driving contra-rotating propellers through a labyrinthine system of drive shafts and gearboxes, was a mechanical nightmare, prone to overheating and failure. The switch to jet power for the UB-49 was meant to be the salvation. 8 Allison J-35 turbojets, slung in paired pods under the wing, promised cleaner, more reliable thrust, but the early jet age was one of fire and fragility. The J-35s were notoriously temperamental, gulping fuel at an alarming rate and prone to compressor stalls and turbine failures. The placement of the engines, buried within the wing's thick root, created nightmarish cooling issues. Ground crews would watch in dismay as heat shimmer distorted the air above the wing, a visible sign of the internal fury they could scarcely control. Finally, there was the challenge of the machine itself. The flying wing's beauty, its seamless, rivet-free skin, was its Achilles heel. Northrop's pioneering use of adhesive bonding and molded panels, while reducing drag, made repairs and modifications fiendishly difficult. You couldn't simply unbolt a panel, you had to carefully cut and rebond. This made mass production, the relentless, pounding need of a nation at war and later the Cold War, a virtual impossibility. In an era where factories like Willow Run were spitting out a B-24 Liberator every hour, the flying wing was a bespoke suit of armor in a war demanding millions of identical helmets. The end came not with a spectacular crash, but with a bureaucratic sigh. In 1949, the newly formed United States Air Force, facing budget constraints and a desperate need for a reliable, long-range nuclear deterrent, made a cold, strategic calculation. The Convair B-36, a colossal conventional piston and jet hybrid with 6 turning and 4 burning, was ungainly and slow, but it was a known quantity. It was stable. It could be built by the hundreds. It could carry the bomb. The UB-49, for all its promise, was a brilliant, flawed question mark. The contract was canceled. The final act was of supreme irony and profound sadness. The remaining UB-49 prototypes, the very machines that had haunted German dreams, were ordered destroyed. On a barren patch of desert at Edwards, under a pitiless sun, bulldozers and smelting crews reduced the futuristic shapes to piles of scrap aluminum. The Air Force, in a move that felt like attempted erasure, even ordered the destruction of the jigs and tooling, ensuring nothing like it could ever be built again. A few examples, like the second XB-35, were spared the torch, but were hidden away in forgotten corners of storage yards, their sleek wings slowly accumulating dust and bird droppings, forgotten relics of a future that never was. The world, it seemed, had looked upon the blueprint for tomorrow and found it too difficult to read.